this Tuesday, June 4th meeting of the City of Flagstaff Regional Plan Committee at 6:02 p.m. and we will take roll call.
Kelly Applin. Joining. Paul Byer.
Here.
Tina Berger. Here. Alicia Chi. Yep. Eva Estrella. Rick Foreman.
Yes.
B. Garcia will be here in a minute. Susie Garrett. Robert Hamilton.
Present.
David Hayward.
Here.
Michelle James.
Here.
Michelle, I'll get your name fixed on the roll call. Julie Reed.
Just give it up.
I'm sorry.
No, not here, but like people.
Rick Miller.
So used to it.
Tom Pearson.
Here.
It's Walter on, Walter Phelps. Kim Robinson. John Van Landingham's excused. He let me know he wasn't coming. Diane Bosick. She's also excused. She's out. So is Al White excused. Christy Zeller. I'll let you know if anybody joins after roll call.
Is there anyone online?
Not at this time, just staff. Stella and from Mountain Line and Jess from the county. Michelle McNulty from the city are online for staff.
Would anyone like to read the Indigenous land acknowledgement?
The City of Flagstaff humbly acknowledges the ancestral homelands of this area's indigenous nation. These lands are still inhabited by native families, sacred to indigenous peoples. Honor them, their legacies, their traditions, and their continued contributions. Celebrate their past, present, and future generations will forever make this place as home.
Thank you, Paul. So we'll move into the meat and potatoes, the review of the infrastructure and public safety chapter. The read on the room, I'd kind of like to see if we could get out of here a little early today. Who wants to stay here until 9 o'clock?
Way to work the room down.
So,
Perfect.
So obviously, I mean, we'll do all our regular diligence, but I think, you know, given this is a somewhat shorter chapter, I think some of these things are pretty common sense. So hopefully we can try and move through relatively quickly and try and get out of here by 8 o'clock. Sarah, I'm assuming the overview of the statutory requirements and the questions and clarification on background information are.
They're just verbal. Yeah. So the general plan and county comprehensive plan requirements in this chapter are actually like quite a lot of different ones. This could be, there's several elements of what's called an element in the state statute that this chapter includes, which is public facilities and safety, but it also includes like public buildings and facilities. I think some of that was not quite included in the document. But we tried to cover many of the things. You know, some of the stranger things that this chapter requires are things like talking about peak flow requirements for water pipes and, you know, the state statute, when you get to this section, is very down in the, so there's a lot of background material here. We tried to balance like what's required with what's really pertinent. So for instance, broadband internet is not required to be discussed in a general plan at all, but it didn't feel like a discussion of utilities could be complete in the 2020s if we didn't acknowledge that both the city and county are doing work to make that a more complete and a more reliable infrastructure in a rural county. So the section got quite lengthy. Like you said, it was short. It's actually the longest one you guys have reviewed so far.
Well,
but
you know, it's because I don't care about it.
Because you don't care about the first 20 pages. But it is kind of on the lengthier side. So staff definitely is looking for any feedback on like things that could be cut or shortened. I know we love to talk about fire operations in this region. The only thing we didn't really get included was kind of a description of our cooperative agreements, which might be worth having a call out box about. But if, you know, there's also a lot of information on protection and our operations side and aviation. If that feels like it's too much or you feel like it's repetitive, just let's look at it with kind of that cutting eye. I'm also going to have for this chapter in particular, the writer editor look at it and see if any of it can be combined or skimmed down or simplified. We do have a fire and emergency management snapshot, and so some information could be moved to that, but it at least gives us a chance to look at it all together. The other part of the chapter that is an optional part of the chapter, but we are working to include is a section on flood control. And it very specifically says in the statute that flood control is completely optional to discuss in comprehensive plans and general plans because flood control boards have their own mechanism for doing their planning. However, we're trying to come up with a good way to describe Flagstaff's situation as within the region, the city has some flood control roles, which is not typical of other regions, and the county has a flood control board and district. And so that is very unique in Arizona, and we're trying to make sure it's put together in a way that is clear. Anything to that, Melissa? Lucinda Andriani is working on that language.
Right, yeah, so Lucinda is the county's deputy manager and flood control district director. And so she's working on language right now to see what would be appropriate to include the regional plan, because like Sarah was saying, it is a flood control district and, you know, they cover the entire county. Specific discussion for this. Back to us.
And another piece that's not always required, but something we're trying to do is verify our numbers on the expected life of the landfill. For a long time, the city has said that 2045 was kind of the life of the landfill. And as we've been digging into it a little more, we found that's actually the capacity. That number, when people put it out there, was not the whole landfill, but the currently developed cell of the landfill. And so landfills, what ADEQ requires is that if there's a cell, you have multiple cells, and as you're closing one, you open the next one. And we have still several undeveloped cells. I think depending on how we split up the available space, it could be 4, could be 2. It just depends how you design your expansion. But that is land that is in our jurisdiction and cleared to be part of the landfill. The NEPA's done, the property is basically already in our permit. But some of those numbers are getting reviewed again so that we can make sure what we put here feels more accurate than maybe the numbers that were getting shared a few years ago. And Scott Overton, who is not able to be here tonight because he's out of town, has said if we've got questions about that, we can just kind of put them in the parking lot, and he can be here on the 18th, the parking lot cleanup with answers. So that's kind of what shakes out of where we are in the chapter, which is pretty far along. And I will say, compared to the last chapter of this nature we had in the current plan, I find all the information here much more understandable, and more of it is related to land use than what I think we did previously. So hopefully that feels good to everybody too. We had a lot of contributions from a lot of different agencies. Tim's staff contributed, fire at both the city and county, public works in both agencies, engineering in both agencies looked it over. So it's a good collaborative effort, lots to think about. I know Susie sent me some questions ahead of time, and I responded to them, and I just said I had the answers, and I wanted to know if you wanted to just have me forward those or just go over them verbally.
No, they're just too deep. They're minor.
Yeah.
I don't think they're worth discussing.
Good. So you had a couple. I think we'll work on some answers to a few of those too.
I did have a question. The so there's the flood control district, but there's portions of basically places that could flood that are not governed by the flood control district. They're governed by the city.
I don't think that's how I would phrase it. I think the city and county both have flood control responsibilities.
Okay.
Some cities don't have flood control at all because they rely wholly on the county, and just the way things have developed in the Flagstaff region, that's not how those two things are coordinated. I don't know if Tim, if you've got any, you've been part of response with the two entities having to work together.
I'd say that's pretty accurate. You know, the county's flood control district is the full county boundaries, but, yeah, our unique situations of the museum fire, post-fire flooding issues that we've had in 2021 and since then created declarations, emergency declarations for both the city and the county. So that opened up the mechanisms for the city to also increase a lot of the stormwater projects that they've had outside of the county flood control.
Yeah, we sort of have duplicative, have to stay coordinated on those responsibilities. So that makes it not easy to just write something that's very clear about how it works and what we do.
It's not clear how it will.
Like that it's unique, I guess.
So I did have one question on sort of coordinating flood control between the city and the county. It's a story I heard, which might be false, but in 1994, the county did build a flood control structure on Sinclair Wash, right on the city boundary, to benefit Mountain Dell. And what I heard from the city was that they didn't even tell the city in advance, they just built it. You know, so I mean, that was 30 years ago and it might be false, but I'm thinking this is not that was 30 years ago, maybe we're doing better now. I'd like some assurance that in fact, we are doing better now. That, you know.
I would, looking over my direction, I would like to say, or to think that we are. My realm, and I apologize for those that don't know me. My name is Tim Carter. I'm the Deputy Director of County Emergency Management for Coconino County. We work very closely with Flood Control District, but they obviously do their own operations. It has seemed that lately that all the flooding impacts that we've had, if they've impacted the county, then they immediately impacted the city as well. So I know that cooperation, collaboration between city, county, our contract engineers and construction firms has definitely increased that I've seen over the last several years.
So, you know, when I read this, is that real or is this?
Well, when we get our actual language, I think if you want to review it as part of the parking lot, I'm gonna have it just sent out by
I just
email.
want somebody to pat me on the back and say, don't worry.
Okay, that's fair.
For what it's worth, County Flood Control District delivered a project on Sinclair Wash through Mountain Dell in partnership with the city of Flagstaff, and involved a sewer extension and shared funding to
That was the most recent one.
mitigate some of the flood impacts through that stretch of the community into
so-
the city. So
Well, maybe.
that's a pretty hard turn from the 90s.
Andy, do you have a question?
A couple things. Is respect to public safety and transportation. There was no,
Jumping into the document.
yeah, are we not there? I'm sorry, I came in late, so.
Yeah, so I would say, let's jump into the preamble, I think, first. So the section at the front, anyone has kind of open, anyone has sections they want to talk about. And I think, especially if anyone has sections that they feel are less than 100% necessary, right? Per Sarah's request that we might like to be able to shorten this preamble section a little bit. And pick up.
Going in the opposite direction.
So I'd rather start halfway through with where we want.
Okay. With respect to public safety and transportation, there's no acknowledgement of the Flagstaff and the potential problems with public safety that being the most recent example of that, but we all know that hazardous material goes by on I-40 as well as on the train tracks. So I don't know if that is something the county address, the city and county address in a plan like this. But I noted the table that is here and talks about a history of what would be considered issues, declared disasters. And it's just concerning. And it's known by some people in the community that BNSF would like to add a third track. And so that is a land use issue. And it seems to me that we need to be cognizant of these materials moving through our community. And maybe that's what emergency planning does, prepares for something like that. But no, I would feel better on the back if there was a little more explicit acknowledgement that we have hazardous materials moving through our community.
Everybody's looking at me again.
Well, I mean, so the table that we're looking at on the screen right now is from the multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan, which your staff updates every 4 years or 5 years, every 5 years. And this was the assessment at the time. And yes, we had a lot of conversations because at transportation engineering, which is often vehicles, bus, bike, and PED, read this section and thought transportation accidents were like crashes, where it's more like a plane crash or a rail derailment. And I don't know if you can speak to what actually is like included in these counts.
So sure. So typically, you're right. This plan has to be updated every 5 years. Just to give you a little background, this is the only plan a jurisdiction has to have approved by FEMA in order to qualify for disaster reimbursement dollars. So it's a big deal. We just submitted a grant request starting now for the next update. It usually takes about 14 to 18 months to update these plans. A lot of scientific data, as you can tell, go into identify hazards and stuff. This is a unique one because it's a multi-jurisdictional. So the county will seek grant dollars for this, but then bring all of our municipalities and jurisdictions under one plan. So everybody has a section of this plan. Because it involves FEMA, which is another 4-letter word, it is a little bit weird, and there's some nuances that we have to include in there. So typically the hazards involve natural hazards. They typically don't involve, you won't see things like terrorism and man-made disasters in them most of the time. Ours does have aircraft accident in there as one of our extra add-ons. That was at the request of the town of Tucson. Because they have the 3rd busiest airport in the state. So believe it or not, little town of Tucson with all the rotor wing helicopter tours that come in out of there, they've got 100 flights coming in and out a day out of that airport. And that is a very real concern, a very real risk that they asked to have included. But it definitely could include, train derailments, hazmat spills, the tanker truck driving down the freeway, a lot of that stuff. So it is kind of a catch-all. We have made the same observations in the current 21 plan that will get kind of clarified a little bit more in the 2026 plan when that gets adopted in a couple of years. So thank you.
I mean, it's, we can make some verbal acknowledgement that there's risk exposure from just either physically the train derailing and causing damage, or there being a spill, or, there was the fire that happened in Holbrook a few weeks ago. So, a lot of what happens when they put in the 3rd rail though, is they increase the safety of all of those features. So the rail upgrades that come with having a 3rd rail are not just like we add a 3rd rail, it's also they do all the safety upgrades to all of the rail lines. So a lot of derailments I know are from what we've heard from BNSF are caused by infrastructure issues or things being on the tracks that shouldn't be.
That, after the big accident, train accident derailment in Ohio.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the name of the
East
town?
Palestine.
Yeah, Daggett, before she was mayor, I think she was just like council, she asked for an update from I think from the city, I'm assuming it wasn't the county. So to kind of what the response would be here. That was a big issue, concern. So the city folks, they're at a presentation about what to do if there's a derailment, hazardous material. So you find out who those are, maybe you know who.
Might have been,
Keep bills.
I think it was Jerry, though now we have Daniel Kelly. The city now has an emergency operations manager, which we didn't have someone in emergency operations before. We were more relying on the county, but now we do have somebody whose job it is to think through that from just the city services side as well. Like we now have a city operations EOP just on like what happens. Who stops going to the office? How do we shelter in place? Or we talked about it at City Hall a little about like derailment can happen right next to many of our offices, this one included, and what would that mean for cars in and out of here?
So your note will allow somebody to write something up about derailment and hazardous materials on trains and.
We can talk about that.
One, I was, you mentioning the city's emergency operations plan. I will kind of brag a little bit on the city and the county. Recently has brought in the same contractor who wrote the state's emergency operations plan when she was employed by the state. And one of the guiding principles is for every plan at every level to kind of sync up and, and speak the same language. So you have everything from federal policies and guidelines down to the state's emergency response plan. The county's plan nests seamlessly under the states. The cities is seamlessly under the counties. And they have taken a industry best practice of all hazards approach. So we no longer have a wildfire plan, a hazmat plan, a flooding plan. It is one plan that is suitable for all applications. It doesn't focus on what the hazard is, just that the hazard is, if you will. So it follows an all hazards model. And for the hazmat things, we have had a lot of training exercises and tabletop exercises recently with those. Had one back in the summer that we had a couple hundred people attend from all around the region. With the scenario was a train hits a car parked on the tracks at San Francisco and derails. So that is one thing that we look at, but all of our plans, and you can grab them offline, they're public plans, but they're all considered all hazards.
Including hazardous material. That would be really different than other things. And what it is, it's gonna explode, it's air.
They're basically roles and responsibilities documents. So where we may have if it's a wildfire plan, who serves as in this role may be a fire guy. If it's a hazmat incident, it may be someone specializing in hazmat. So we'll figure out who to plug those in based on the specific incident, the where and the what. But the framework for the plan remains the same no matter what the hazard is.
Diana, you think you're satisfied? Can we move on to another?
Yeah, I just had a question. Is, in other sections, we talk about prevention. It's in the wheel. I just, because I don't know anything about this. Are there standards that apply to railroad lines going through cities the size of Flagstaff as well as the freeway? Do we do things here that try and minimize?
Well, the Federal Rail Administration has, just like the city or county, a whole manual of regulations and safety for building preparedness and operations in terms of the land use side. Julie, did you want to throw something in for that?
Yeah, the city's been working on a rail safety plan for the third main line track for all.
Yeah, they
So that's in the works. The draft has already been.
So that's a plan that the railroad requested to follow.
They are a partner in that effort.
Okay, thank
Just
you.
one quirky observation is, in 1993, when we had Lake Continental, that was caused by the railroad. There's a pipe that's about this big around. It's not been replaced. It is half full of debris last 3 months ago. I love. So that's how responsive they are. 30 years later, they've done nothing to stop that flood. They're their own.
They are. I mean, rail lines are a congressional grant.
Right.
And they have federal authorities. So we do have to treat them a lot like we do our other federal partners. Working with the rail requires a partnership mindset and working together on things. And when there's capital work to be done, like the downtown mile and the third line, we come together to talk about those things on a regular basis and partner for grants and work on safety plans.
I think we've been much more successful recently, right, than we have in decades, so.
That's good.
Yeah.
Can we move on to another subject? Does anyone else have anything specifically from the preamble that they want to?
I had one thing about that and about Lake Continental. Somewhere in there it says you work with, there's a plan to railroad, but it didn't mention out there. It might have been in the first draft.
Well, there's the section on the Rio de Flag flood control
Rio de Flag.
project.
That's what
The
it,
Lake Continental is not part of the Rio de Flag flood control project.
but it should be.
Well, it's a different,
It's the Rio de Flag.
yeah, but it doesn't fall into the project that's as defined by the Army Corps of Engineers, so.
Anyway, that's a concern too.
So does anyone else, I think sort of similar to Diane, bringing up something that jumped out, them out of the preamble, anyone else have anything else they wanted to discuss?
So I have one small question. So we talked about electric lines and putting some of them underground. And it's just, do we require new electric lines to be underground? A smart thing to do for fire.
City, yes.
We do. Okay. Simple answer. Thank you.
Distribution lines.
Yeah.
Like, you're not talking about like a big 69 kV.
No, the ones that are going through my neighborhood.
Yeah.
Julie?
You're asking about, it's a pretty lengthy preamble, like area that maybe. I was just thinking, there's so many resources out there, like we have this section about the WUI, for example, and describing everything about the WUI. And I wonder if there's, wildland urban interface. I wonder if there's a way to take that content and simply provide a link to that, and just kind of in the spirit of, right, because you're wanting to reduce the content, right?
Yeah, or at least to consolidate it and make it very clear.
So that's one that jumps out at me, is to provide a link for those in defensible space and strategies like that.
So when there's basically a pre-existing document, you don't have to just describe everything that's in that, you can
Yes.
reference it.
If a couple of these are where there's some longer descriptions or statistics, if there's a way to point to the EM site for that data, which is probably updated very regularly. Is that a possibility, or is that helpful?
Yeah, that's definitely one we can make it more concise for sure on that. You mean because that's like nationally available information and not very locally specific?
Yeah.
We do want to mention it because there is some discussion going on at Coconino County, like the city's had the WUI code adopted for a long time, and Coconino County is having discussions about whether they would adopt a WUI code too, which would affect how people.
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion going on about that because the county is so big and so varied. It's right now it's voluntary. It's a huge thing to this, but it's encouraged, but it's not required. So. Right.
I shocked. Did not realize that.
We condition, I think Melissa, help me if I remember correctly, we've conditioned some subdivisions and some things like that when they get their permitting.
Yeah.
They
Objects.
would need to do pre-construction thinning and that kind of thing, but
It's not required. There's been a lot of discussion about it, back and forth, about how that would work for the county. Given, what it would mean for property owners and the size of the county and the different landscapes.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit different, right? Because there's the density factor as well. So wildfire risk and the risk to property is dramatically increased, right, when there's higher density. And I can see why in the county where things are a lot more spread out, where there's less risk of it sort of jumping house to house, right?
Coordinating with the different fire chiefs on, what we can actually, what the comprehensive plan policies how they might be written to at least support that, if not go. Right now, that's not in place. It would have to be very customized
yeah,
and almost site.
the different fuel types that
Yeah.
are in the county. If you put a house in, let's say, house in Pony Park or Thousand Winona Road in the Pinyon Juniper fuel type could have different design characteristics, different standards. And a house in the Ponderosa Pine Stand versus a house outside of Sedona or Fredonia in desert. So it is a complicated thing, and we have, past 10 years that I was involved with the fire chief, as the fire chief with the county, we've been talking about work code. That's at least 13 years worth of talking about it.
Guess I didn't. That conclusion out of reading that paragraph.
Does anyone else have any other sections that they might suggest could be shortened in their mind?
I have a couple of very small ones. I'll just,
Sorry, Doug had his hand up first, Paul.
It's a very, very short answer, I think. The map. Public facilities for fire safety emergency evacuation map. Is that a requirement? And is there a purpose for that map?
Yeah, it's a requirement, just that we have to show a map of how we've got districts and stations for fire. A lot of weird requirements.
Okay, well, if it's a requirement.
Transportation section.
The stations change and I can tell you right now, your two stations out in Highlands that are unstaffed are no longer fire stations at all.
Ah,
And Summit may be the same way. Summit has at least one of their stations that they've shut down as well.
Yeah, then no must.
for catching that.
Doug?
There's one addition to the emergency location, because the Market of Dreams is almost open. And I see Murdoch on here, but I don't see Sunnyside Market of Dreams. Do they need to be added? Not on.
As a police substation?
What did you have?
oh, if I have tiny little things, who should I send them to?
Just send them out. Or the ether.
Send them to me and Elsa.
I sent that one to you, Sarah. but-
Um,
Fine. No, it's good to catch these things because we know they will change. They just have to be accurate when we adopt the plan. They don't have to be accurate for eternity.
Yeah.
Along that line, just made me think of,
Let's look at the map.
I'm not sure what a police substation is, but I know that they're talking about a police presence at the downtown connection center.
I don't know if that's a substation or not.
Yeah, what, I don't remember either.
I think Estella had joined us. Let's see if she's still on the call.
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. And was the question about a police station at the DCC?
Yeah, is there going to be a police substation at the downtown connection center when it's completed?
It's still to be determined. We are reserving a space. I don't know though, like the definitions if it's, you know, considers a substation, but we are leaving space for the police. So I guess if you want to leave it as a question mark and then we can get more information, but.
Yeah, we can follow up with that as a parking lot item.
Okay, yeah, it's still to be determined, but it's not off the, it's not off the list, I guess, of options.
Well, that's what a substation is too.
Yeah.
Not gonna be enough room for a present.
Usually a police substation is a spot where it's either staffed or unstaffed, but if it's unstaffed, then the police have access to a space to use as an office or to meet confidentially with people who are witnesses to crimes or other things. And so they are, you know, spread out in places that can be convenient so people don't always have to come to the police station to meet with them. They don't necessarily staff all our police substations like with a person there all the time, but they usually have an emergency call button too. So if you walk up to a substation and it is not a person in it, you can hit it directly to connect you to 911.
Does anyone else have anything they want to do on the preamble? Otherwise we'll move on to the policies. $6:39, we're making it happen. So the goal IPS 1 is work across all government operations and services to reduce the risk of natural and human caused hazards to residents and businesses. A sub-policy of that is allocate available public resources necessary for the city and county to prepare for and adapt to natural and human caused hazards so that all government operations support community resilience. Is this a direct cut and paste from the last plan? Is that what this?
It's darn close. This one's pretty close.
Read it, I was wondering if safety should be resilient, but isn't it also to support safety?
Well, this is about, if you remember the circle, there's preparedness, which preparedness and adaptation are not necessarily the safety oriented parts of the cycle. I mean, there are safety elements, but response and recovery is more where there's a safety focus. If I got that right, Tim, right? I've had my ICS 100.
So resilience is about our ability to weather these emergencies, right?
So it's just like, if you think about the cycle, it's not in the part of the cycle where the emphasis is safety. Not to say we're not addressing safety.
And that's somewhere else in here? It's not even, safety's in all separate. You're saying? I'm just trying to understand. Titles. No, so I was.
Yeah, I mean, safety is more on the side of like how we are doing response. So it's under IPS 3. It says the land use issue is to locate our facilities so that the staff training and resources are safe, effective, and risk-based emergency response. Because the land use issue is you locate these critical facilities so that they are not likely to be burned over or flooded out or be so close to the train tracks that a derailment takes out firefighters. you know, all of those things. Like you are the location, the localizing of these resources, which can be just storing things too, like the resilience hub concept kind of fits within that too. Like, so if we, which I know no one from sustainability is here, but if we have money to go build resilience hubs where we would store water and things. So if people are evacuated, there's a location that is staffed and ready to be receiving people, or on heavy smoke days can have air filtration for people who may have health issues. So whether that's a small incident or a big incident, that's kind of on the response side of things.
First meeting tomorrow is on resiliency hub, so the market will have HEPA filters installed as part of the grant. We'll have a backup generator, so we'll be staffed for that. So
Yeah.
we'll learn more about that, but that is a fact. It's gonna be HEPA filters, generators and all kinds of things that are going into that resiliency hub. So it'll be Murdoch and us. It's a mobile.
Yes, mobile.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's a mobile resilience hub too, but
Everyone live with 1.1 and we'll move on to the next one.
Yes.
So 1.2 is prepare for and mitigate the impacts of fire and flood events to reduce the risk of loss of life, property damage, disruption of public services, and loss of watershed health and wildlife habitat. This one's got a longer list of implementation guidelines on it. So if anyone wants to jump in on any comment on that. Go ahead.
Didn't understand the third one, cost benefit analysis should be completed for any large project. What's an example of a large project in this context?
Full project? No, the answer, so this is.
I mean, I don't know if there's like a threshold for a large project. per se.
What even type of?
Is it a large flood control project or?
These are mitigation projects, so like these are things we do ahead of there being an emergency. Like the flood like if you think of the Schultz Pass basins that were built after the museum fire, that's a recovery activity. That's trying to mitigate an impact from a
Right.
disaster that's already occurred. And before an incident occurs, we are trying to build something ahead of time. And I think, you know, usually cost benefit analyses, sometimes
Right.
that can be a requirement of getting your money. Like, so for instance, US 180 bypass is something we keep studying every 5 or 10 years as a way of having an alternative route for evacuations and also for dealing with snowball traffic. But it never gets a cost benefit ratio anywhere close to 1. And therefore it is never, ever, ever eligible for funding. So until the day where circumstances change and you can get that kind of a cost benefit ratio, you can't get the federal money for some of these things. So that once a large project could be.
The qualifier put, because it really kind of sits there without understanding what it applies to. Are we talking about a large mitigation project, a large flood control project? You know,
I could put large mitigation projects,
that helps me.
because I think that that would be the clearest thing I think to put there, because depending on what kind of hazard we're talking about, every agency makes their own rules about what they consider large.
Okay.
So we couldn't come up with a one size fits all of that, because it takes you down like the federal regulatory world in a pretty deep way. So Tim's nodding, so.
FEMA requires it for, in their hazard mitigation grant program. It doesn't matter if it's $1 or $100 million, you're doing a cost benefit.
So if you want FEMA money, it's required. And I think that's kind of a way of hedging, like if we're doing anything that's large, we don't want to assume we're doing it on our own. We should just upfront pay the cost benefit analysis so we know. Is it going to be eligible? Does it help us understand it? So that's just a project side thing. And maybe that doesn't really belong in the plan because it's in support of the mitigation projects, but it is more like of a technical finance side.
It's required anyway.
And it's required if you're doing FEMA money, but it's not required. You can get DOT money for emergencies. You can get.
Else have any other comments on the? Good.
I was concerned about the kind of, sense of the wording, prepare for and mitigate, that doesn't convey any urgency to it. Back in page 11, talking about the risk, it says, as climate change impacts become more widespread, flooding events increase in the number of neighborhoods at risk, climate change modeling projects intense monsoons, large storms, wet snow. The same thing goes on for fire risk and so forth. And yet we get down here and it's sort of a mundane, let's just kind of prepare and mitigate. I think we need to have more expansive language, something like expand and improve, increase our capabilities and grow our expanded capacity and things like that.
So let me see if I can read you our definitions for mitigation and preparedness and see if those cover it. Because when we say prepare and mitigate, we go straight to the definitions here.
Yeah, I don't know that I think that
They're
that's,
defined things.
I think that that's the point. I think it is a matter of language, right? In that we're looking at we've got a whole bunch of policies here, and there are potentially some, right, that we want to emphasize and say, like, we really do need to be doing more over the next 10 years in regard to this than we have over the, previous decades. I'm inclined to agree with Tom that it is a little light given how big, the risks are.
And everything we talked about is about how climate change is increasing the intensity of the danger and will continue to increase the intensity of the danger between now and 2045. I just don't think it, we talk about that in the background and then we just kind of, the whole sense I get from reading the wording and the way it's phrased is business as usual, just kind of keep on keeping on. And I think we need to do better and convey in these wording the intensity or the necessity for really expanding our capability. I don't think in the specifics, I don't think fire suppression is mentioned at all. Currently, and Dirk would know much better than me, but currently I understand, well, you mentioned, Dirk, fire stations that are closed. As I understand, we're undermanned for the 6 firemen right now. But didn't we have a fire truck about an accident? I just read that.
I don't know if we want to get into super detail.
We're undermanned. Right now we're undermanned and under-equipped and so forth, and yet we don't even mention fire suppression capability anywhere. On the forest restoration.
Let's stick with your first point.
Okay.
Sorry. Right, which was in regards to the language.
And I'm open to listen to the definition if you want.
Yeah, I just wondered if it would be useful to cross-reference it.
It's saying it within one word, then.
Let me just read it and see. So mitigation is the process of minimizing the loss of life and property by reducing the impacts of disasters and emergencies. This involves taking measures and actions that prevent an emergency from occurring and reduce the likelihood of an emergency happening, or minimizing the harmful effects of disaster that cannot be avoided. Preparedness is a continuous cycle that involves planning, organizing, training, equipping, exercising, evaluating, and taking corrective.
Does that make you feel, Tom? Because when I hear what your argument is and when I hear the definition, I think they coincide a lot.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with the words that are there. They're absolutely accurate and so forth, but they do not convey
Urgency.
and the need for expanding capability, for increasing our capacity, both the speed and response of our ability, and things are available for us to do that, but we have to convey in the document the urgency of doing it so that the leadership will, act accordingly. And look, for new opportunities and you know, especially with our firefighting capability and the mitigation part. I'll get to that later.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, do this, I mean, I'd like to see, something added in terms of language that talks about leasing in some way.
Somewhere in the parking lot, I just read it. There's a sentence in there regarding it.
It was for, I think, for some previous discussions we had right around.
What was the previous discussion focused on this chapter?
That item was something that we'd be talking about now, so.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Now we're talking about it.
Yeah.
That's what I was, thank you.
So now we are covering, check some stuff off. Nothing more satisfying than checking off things. So can everyone, I guess let's just put it out there. Can everyone live with adding some language based on staff suggestion about policy 1.2, increasing our ability to mitigate these impacts?
It should be commensurate with problems and changes.
Do we have any objections to that?
You want us to bring that language back or do you want to make it more urgent? Got it.
Anyone else have anything on that section?
The whole section?
No, just on that one policy, so 1.2. The only thought, I did have one thought coming in was, you know, we talked about the resource protection standards and their impact on ability to mitigate fire risk. I'm just wondering how that could be, you know, if and how that could be incorporated in some way, talking, you know. I mean, and it feels like this is kind of the appropriate place to do it. I mean, we've got it here, I guess, mitigate urban and neighborhood fire risks. Maybe there needs to be a reference to how that interconnects with the resource protection standards. Because we're talking about trees and the ability for trees to set on fire.
I know that Shell, I don't know if he wants to speak to the fact, so there is an RPO item in the parking lot about language in the resource stewardship and resilience chapter that we'll bring back on the 18th. It's one of our items to kind of come back with for that cleanup day. But I don't think, I'm not sure if Shell, if you want to talk about that at all.
Thanks, Sarah. No, I would just add that we did do, I think everyone knows that we did the tour with some members of the steering committee. We've most recently met with Headwaters Economics, which is a kind of nonpartisan, nonprofit think group that helps cities look at their codes through the lens of wildfire. And so we are actually entering into a memorandum of agreement with them to have them participate in our code analysis project so that they can lend that expertise as we do look at the RPO. So I think that would be my biggest update right now. Thanks, Sarah.
I will fangirl Headwaters Economics if nobody has read.
I thought
all
I saw a smile on your face.
incredibly wonky, cool research they do. Like,
Are they having that thing here soon?
Waters Economics. I don't know if they're doing an event. They're out of like Bozeman, Montana, but they do like economic analysis on environmental issues like throughout the Western United States. And
I had a quick question. Does Firewise USA term refer to what Tom's talking about at all? Okay.
yeah, it's
Stuff like
hard.
having a 30-foot, I guess, from your house.
Thank you. I'm new to the term, so thank you.
Could we reference just somehow how it ties in that second to the last implementation guideline with the, it says mitigate fire risks. And resource protection standards play into that.
Sure.
Is everyone all right moving on to IPS 1.3?
You know, Christie and, oh, sorry.
I have something about one, think about one.
Oh, you still do? Okay, yeah.
Um, first, I think we should have something specifically in here about increasing firefighting and fire suppression, manning, equipment, capability, and so forth. See it in here.
I think that's probably because it's not a land use issue. I mean, does that sound right, Sarah? I agree with you. That we
Suppressing wildfires is.
Well, it also depends where you're looking at, Tom. I totally respect your point and understand where you're coming from. If we're gonna look at one perspective, we gotta look at all perspectives, and there are folks amongst us that have been here for eons that celebrate fire and understand and how to work with fire and not necessarily, I mean, we've seen fire burn this town a couple of times. What I'm saying is the earth will take it back in time. Pretending that there is a need to suppress it from some folks doesn't actually be full circle with everybody's opinion.
I agree with you completely, Anthony, but what we need to do, that would be something that would be critical to do, actually, is just what you're saying. We should define, there should be a map. It says, this is the area around Flagstaff. Fires must be suppressed as quickly and intensively as possible. And the other areas are where it's natural good fire and it needs to be managed, and need to have that. We need to have, and this, J.E. Fuller study and the NAU study of the economics with the $2.8 billion of damage. That fire area has to be suppressed, detected and suppressed as quickly as possible so that damage doesn't occur. We could go a couple miles and out someplace else and we want to have it a lot. Yeah. We need to know where those places are and how and define those. But in the areas where
Those maps, I think, exist.
okay, I'm sorry, I didn't.
I mean, now, there may not be a city map, but I know the Forest Service for sure has suppression maps, and they have managed fire areas that they won't put the fire out in necessarily. They'll look at it first and decide if they want to manage it. So those kinds of things do exist.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, I want to get back, I think like Tom, I think for me, like it doesn't feel like this is the place for that particular push. I completely agree. I think we should be throwing a lot more money to make sure that our house doesn't burn down, because I'm frankly at this point quite hurt by it. I just don't know that this is, a land use planning document.
We have-
Would
Fit-
agree on that
Would
too.
it fit down at like 0.3 where it says
Okay.
provide quality service?
Uh-huh. Which one is that?
1.3.
IPS 0.3,
I just started.
Oh, 0.3, so
down further.
1.3.
It's in the next goal.
the next, so two.
Next policy.
Yes.
Sure, I agree.
Yeah, okay, yeah, so it's good, yeah, so we can.
Could, and potentially could have some word or two about expanding in order to provide better quality service. I'm not a wordsmith.
But so, yeah, I mean,
Or is that enough, provide quality service?
can we hold it, Tom, and then talk about it at IPS 0.3?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One more point about the one just before the last one there, forest restoration and risk mitigation efforts. It has the phrase should continue. Right now, it's my understanding that we have a great program, and I hope I have the numbers right, that we're authorized funding for 20,000. We've not authorized funding. We have identified 20,000 acres that require mitigation, but we're only funded for 2,000 acres a year. which is wholly inadequate. So I think that instead of should, it'd say something like should be expanded or.
It does, Tom, it does right afterwards, it says, and be expanded.
Oh, yeah. Yes, be expanded. Okay.
You all right with that?
Do you want to, I said, I know you wanted more urgency in the policy overall, but it could say forest restoration and risk mitigation efforts should be expanded and expedited on all lands and to better
That
mitigate.
sounds.
You make that more urgent, I think most easily. I'm having a harder time thinking about how to do it for the policy, but I think with that emphasis, that could be added to this one pretty rapidly.
If we're expanding it, we're obviously also continuing it at the same time.
Yeah. But I mean, if you're saying, the point you're making about the 2,000 versus 20,000, like there's also expediting and spending it faster is different.
We will move on to IPS 1.3, and then we're going to take a 10-minute break and hopefully we'll get through the next two goals. So this one is about locating the facilities to provide response to hazards, right? So we've moved on from mitigation and we're talking about response to hazards and where to put those facilities specifically. Does that sound right, Sarah?
One of the reasons I thought that Tom's previous comment related to this is something that's in my head that's not written anywhere, which is one of the facilities for fire that the city of Flagstaff is looking for a location for as part of their location study for fire stations. Nobody from fire is here tonight, but I can follow up on this as they're looking to create a WUI launch pad. So it's more particularly a fire station that is also equipped with the wildland firefighting equipment needed. Like the Mormon Lake Workstation on Lake Mary Road is essentially a WUI launch pad. It really only has like the Forest Service firefighters there and housing for them, but that is a facility the Forest Service plans to decommission in the future potentially because they're going to combine. They've always had plans to kind of recombine the Flagstaff Ranger District into one central location. And so that kind of facility looks very different and has different land requirements than like a structure-driven fire station. That's not included in here anywhere, but I could put that on the parking lot and go back and ask them to write some kind of policy that's supportive of that effort. I know it's already ongoing, but that could be something to call out here.
Anyone have anything on 1.3?
I do. Neighborhood associations and HOAs should be contacted. Should. I'm just trying to look for definition there a little bit. Could be. I don't know, what's the rule or, I mean, what's the?
They don't tell us anything. I mean, that's the rule.
That's it?
Some
No, I
neighborhoods
don't
don't have associations or
I was
HOAs.
just looking for the should.
You want to add that? And other neighborhoods?
Well, I think that and other neighborhoods, there is like a program that I know, Tim, maybe you can talk about how people can sign up for alerts or identify themselves as someone who has a vulnerability. Like people who are in home health care situations can basically sign up with emergency management so you know where they are.
Exactly right. So there's a part of the county's emergency notification system that allows people to self-report a myriad of things, and we use that information. Essentially, if the police department says we need to evacuate this area, we draw a box on the map of that area. We send out that notice, and then I can run a specialized report of that area to people who have self-identified any health or medical needs that may create those access functional needs where they might need help to evacuate, whether they're bedbound, have oxygen tanks or that can't evacuate on their own. We will then give that report with those addresses to public safety on scene. And then they can just look at those and kind of just start going door to door if they need to, or we can send targeted messaging to those people if we need to. But it is completely voluntary. It's also completely free. So we encourage everyone to sign up for that, but it's part of their Smart 911 account. So when you register for emergency notifications, it's just part of the registration process that you can provide that info.
Cool. Ready, is everyone good living with 1.3 as it is, and we'll take a 10-minute break?
We are.
Don't burn down and we don't.
It's a vote, which is coming. Yeah. Only day two.
Alrighty, everybody. We are on. Oh, IPS. No, are we? Yes.
Yes.
IPS 2.
I think the IPS 2 is the same as PF 2. Like, I don't think there's any changes between this and what we have in the current plan. Just as a note.
Question is the implementation guideline for IPS 2.2 is about the landfill. Kind of pops up out of nowhere. Is this the way it's for it?
Nice. It's very confusing. Just had to be here.
I mean, the landfill has been part of the public buildings and facilities section of the plan. So this is the right section or chapter for it. I can say that. It's open for discussion if this is the right place to put that particular guideline. The other thing under this is, of course, talking about capital block grant funding, capital improvements.
So yeah, I mean, it just kind of jumps out at you, doesn't it? How specific it is. I don't know that that means that it's not something that's valid and something that we do need to look at.
Could there be other things that are missing? People got specific about this, and then there's things we also have here.
Well, I
Not
don't-
that I'm ever looking to expand any.
Yeah, so we don't
But-
add stuff just because one thing that's specific, so let's put a bunch more specific stuff.
No, but I'm just wondering if it stands out. There's two reasons it could stand out, right? It could stand out because it's not the right place, but it could also stand out because it's not grouped with the right.
I think it's the latter, what you're saying is that it's doesn't seem like it's a waste reduction strategy isn't really supporting capital improvement. Maybe something else that if we have to have two guidelines, something else. So it supports capital improvement projects. I mean, that's great. Housing and neutrality and sustainable operations, resilience to hazards, and what else do we need in there? That, and it is very specific because it is citing a city adopted code. We haven't really gotten into a lot of that in our plan. It's just something that stuck out.
Does it feel so specific that it actually should be a strategy? Is that? That's the. I'm sometimes too in the weeds on these things, so. I have to ask why it feels wrong. Is there anything missing under supporting capital improvements for all these things? I mean, we have the connect the CDBG funding with capital improvement projects, target neighborhoods. That's just a kind of a leveraging one, but are there other key things? We talk a lot about capital improvements at City Hall at a time. Many people listen to those conversations. There's a gap here. You should go back for more information on.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, right? Because you're getting into something that is multidisciplinary. So there's no one to sort of turn to and say like, hey, you know, write me an implementation guideline. Because it's planning, it's engineering, it's finance, you know, a whole bunch of different stuff. But you know, the thing that has jumped out a little bit, that's right, is that we've got, you know, we've got quite a lot in that policy there. The same one that Robert referenced and not much in regards to how to achieve it. You know, we've got infill and we talked a lot about how we'll need to adapt to the way we look at infrastructure to enable infill projects, right? Realistically, infill projects at a scale where they're not putting in a new, you know, 1.5 miles of new sewer line, right? So what does that actually look? What does that actually look like? Is there somewhere to?
One, isn't it? Does 3.1 speak to?
3.1 is about emergency response, evacuation routes specifically.
Okay.
So it's not as big as like all capital improvement planning.
Because capital improvement planning, I mean, that's covering sewer lines, water lines, roads.
Should we build it in the CIP? Would you like us to just put that in the parking lot as a comeback and take another look at these?
Yeah.
Are you looking, you're specifically 2.2, right?
Yeah, IPS 2.2. And so how do we, I mean, because we're talking about changing something, right? When we're saying, how do we change the way in which we look at capital improvement projects in a way that facilitates us having more affordable housing with infill, using carbon neutrality and improving our resilience. So it just doesn't feel like that problem has been really solved in those implementation guidelines.
Well, should we agree? Yeah, I was just thinking, so should we add implementation guidelines rather than take it out? I was thinking, if we're saying do this, can't we add some guidelines or some, you know, something in the strategies
Yeah, I think there's a good point.
to that?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe it's a way of making the waste reduction strategy part is too specific and is a strategy, then there's a way of talking about how are capital improvement projects that we do tied to carbon neutrality, right? In generally, right? Not just specifically in that expansion of waste reduction strategies.
Because it talks about zero waste, right? So that leads to the carbon neutrality. So if we had other implementation guidelines that link to affordable housing, so, links to hazards, I mean, we might have other things we could put in there.
Yeah, I
It
think
wouldn't be so strange, just kind of only covering, it's only covering, this seems to be only covering carbon neutrality.
Yeah.
I would rather add to things rather than, I mean, we could put it in the parking lot, but to add things to it.
Sure. We can take a
That's whether it will be included, because it does say prioritize, which I think is really, that's the most important word to me. That's that.
But it feels like there's other priorities that are missing, then it can be like, I understand Robert's question of, is that really it? That's the thing.
Is that really what?
Is that really like the top thing by itself?
Well, what I'm curious about is, are we just looking at zero waste by the city? But if we're just looking at zero waste by the city, with construction in general, which I think is like 40% of what we put into the landfill, and then the displacement of building another landfill, I don't know, when you look at the numbers, and maybe that's just too in the weeds for this portion of it, but it's more than just being zero waste. It's waste that we're adding and then the displacement of land that we're going to have to use in the future.
It also seems to me to say, Anthony, that waste reduction strategies in construction should be implemented to get less going to the landfills to extend the life.
Yeah.
That's what I see.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I agree. I mean,
Good.
I disagree. I think but it just, that one feels too specific and should be a strategy. And there should be a less specific one that talks more generally, right? That a waste reduction strategy for construction waste, for instance, is one of the things that you can do in terms of capital improvement projects to get to carbon neutrality, right? There's other things, not referencing any of those at all. Yeah. Good with that, guys? Is that enough?
Yeah, that'll be a parking lot item because I'll have to go back out to staff with that one.
IPS 3.3, if everyone's ready, is about providing high quality response. So responding with go use the polite phrase. So Tom, what was the part that you wanted to get into this?
Well, I guess the first thing would be the word provide. I would suggest it be changed to expand. Because we need to be better and more, with better coverage in this area. I would suggest expand for the word in there, and then as Dirk was suggesting, to specifically put in here the firefighting and fire suppression capabilities, in terms of equipment and power, infrastructure. I'm sorry, I don't have wording or whatever, but if just feel that this is, we have put in the preface and the background information, we have made it very clear that wildfire and flooding are the two most dangerous threats to Flagstaff. It seems like we should, in this particular paragraph, say that we need to expand our fighting and fire suppression capabilities, that we shouldn't be satisfied with the status quo.
Except it's a matter of money.
It's always a matter of money.
I don't know if they can.
This is more about response.
Yeah, this is a goal too.
Not fire suppression and all that doesn't belong here.
Yeah, I think we should just stop using the word suppression because it means different things for different people. Just talk about it as firefighting, right? Whether that's
fine.
Whether that's fighting a wildfire or fighting a house fire, it's still firefighting. I don't know that I agree on the expand because I think we need to expand our ability to fight wildfire. I don't know that we need to, I don't think that we need to expand our law enforcement, medical and ambulance transport services. I think we're doing a pretty darn good job. So, you know, is there a way to put an implementation guideline that gets to what you're talking about in terms of?
Okay, well, then maybe just have add a specific one in there that says expand the firefighting capability.
For wildfire.
For wildfire. And because the city is growing, we need better firefighting capability within the city. I mean, we've got all these 6-story dormitory apartment things right now. I don't know if we have enough, is our ladder capability sufficient for that? And I don't know. I do know that our equipment is definitely due for replacement. Our engines are.
So what does everyone else think about adding that as an implementation guideline in terms of?
I think some language like that, fine, as a guideline.
Increasing fighting capability for wildfires.
I think that would be fine. I mean, we don't have a whole lot of evidence of how what we have is not sufficient, but there's no reason why we shouldn't say it.
Yeah, I mean, can we assume what we have is not sufficient because it's built for a world now and we are also assuming that wildfire is going to get worse?
Yeah, in theory, I think it's good.
Just
When you're talking about those zones, you know, and historically, there's a couple of fires that I witnessed that were probably in those zones where it was quick suppression. And they were scary looking, you know, and this was probably before you were here. One was here, one was there. But historically, you know, seeing them be put out almost immediately was impressive.
They can't, but we
And then
are.
to watch the other ones burn and burn and burn, didn't mean that they were any better or any more threatening. They were just allowed to do what they had to
Right,
do.
it depends on exactly on where they're located and
Yeah, so the evidence shows from my historical perspective that we're doing okay, but there's nothing wrong with saying a little something in there.
well, here's, you know, I was thinking about that. Are we doing okay? What is one number, one measure that we can go by to say we're doing okay? I would say it's our insurance rates are a great measure for that because insurance companies, their job is knowing everything there is to know about risk. They charge us our homeowners insurance rates based on the risk that we face here in Flagstaff. And our risk is skyrocketing. Our rates, I hope I'm not the only one. My rates are skyrocketing.
But for many variables.
Yeah, but I think there's a widely recognized, right? Understanding that the risk of wildfire is increasing across the entire of the western United States.
And we're saying in the preliminary documentation here that they are. The little paragraph I read from there.
But so if we
About how-
add that implementation guideline and then, Tom, you think that's sufficient for?
Yeah, I do think we should be just in general say that we need to increase our firefighting capability. And it should be across the board, should be with the city right now, and Dirk, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe we're 4 to 6 men short. We've got 2 fire stations closed. We've got antiquated equipment. It takes 5 years to get it. If we order a new fire truck today, it'll be delivered in 5 years. We are not in best shape possible. And the insurance companies, they look at all this stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know that I have enough information you on that point. I mean, I'm fine with talking about it in terms of wildfire. I don't want to expand it to.
Wildfire is more regional. I like
Yeah.
that.
And it goes back to other stuff that we've made clear as a priority in the plan. I'm gonna put that out there. Is everyone able to live with adding that implementation guideline that we increase firefighting capabilities in regards to wildfire risk? And Sarah can make it sound good.
Take it to Neil.
Alrighty, we've just got this one last policy that's ensuring adequate access to properties for emergency response. This is one that kind of hits home for me a little bit, and I'm wondering if there isn't something that can be added here to strengthen this. I live in Market Ranches, which is right behind Seacrest Elementary School. We only have one way out on Quintana. That exit route was blocked 3 or 4 times last summer, the last summer or the summer before, because of the flooding on the highway there. I don't think we ever got to the point where a fire truck couldn't get through that. It wasn't quite deep enough. But we were real close, and the idea that if something had happened to, a member of my family during that 2-hour period, 3-hour period while the road was closed, and that we couldn't get an ambulance in there, it's concerning. So, I think what it comes down to me, I think, Sarah, is there's ensuring adequate access, but then there's also a question of how can we help get secondary access into places where it's already built up, right? I also think to the observatory, right, and the challenges they have with getting that secondary access point in. Many, if you think about up on the Mesa, right, what's that neighborhood called behind the residential school?
The one behind Kimani.
Yeah.
I can't think of it, but I know where you're
That
going.
only has one access point, right, right there. And so how,
That's in the city.
yeah, and that's in the city, so how do we get one that's, you know, and it could just be an emergency access point. How do we get one that's,
Pass as well. I have friends that live and there's a way in
yeah,
there.
yeah.
Right?
There's a lot of places like that.
Yeah, it's quite a bit. Is it part of education, going back to education a little bit too, like we were talking about?
I think so too, but I mean, I think
How do we,
in my neighborhood, there's at least two places where you could easily put in just a gravel driveway, right? That, you know, would become an emergency evacuation route. But there has to be a process in place for collaboration between the various entities to allow that to happen.
Doesn't the county require that?
Well, it is, we do look at that for newer subdivisions and where we're, fire districts rather, you know, to look at those asset points and. But I did have a question for Tim about the emergency management planning, because I understand that there are some evacuation routes identified in there. But is there an opportunity for neighborhoods to develop their own evacuation plan?
Or even just specify a route, right? That as we're gonna drive across this person's yard when we need.
It's been an issue.
Right?
You know, short answer, yes, but, and David talked about Lockett Ranches, you know, I've met with, a couple of the residents on the other side up in, Maldell in the States, and they've expressed the same, you know, the same concern, one way in, one way out. I said, well, if we can just drive right through here, I mean, we're talking about, the problem is, it's all private property. Yeah. So it's up to, you know, the property owners. The county can't come in and after the fact and mandate, you have to add in another road. I don't know enough about the domain or any of that kind of, we're gonna take it over, wouldn't even suggest, but it definitely is something that, you know, we've talked to community development about now, something that they're looking at for all new subdivisions is, you know, having multiple ingress egress points. So many of our neighborhoods are just so old, they're grandfathered in. For the county's plans, back to the diversity of the county and the terrain and, you know, there's really no one size fits all. So we have identified evacuation zones, and that's as granular as we have gotten. And, you know, we encourage then it's that individual family preparedness to, you know your zone and know your route. So, we don't have individual routes that says you need to go, you know, down Main Street, hang a left on Third, because depending on the hazard, that may put you into a threat instead of a way. Now, the city of Sedona, which I think the city of Flagstaff is moving to model also. We worked with the city of Sedona. They invested sizable capital in a full citywide evacuation plan that does more of that, and including traffic studies, a lot of visitor data, things like that. It was a six-figure plan that is really nice if you have a chance to look at that. But it does identify, you know, recommended primary and secondary routes. But of course, they're looking at just the city limits of Sedona. So it wasn't really feasible for the county. Actually, a quote we got was over $1 million to do something like that in a way that we really still wouldn't really be a usable tool for the community. But I believe the city might be looking at an evacuation plan or trying to find funding for something. I know that it's in the pipeline, but.
I mean, I guess my point comes to where you hinted at, right, is that how can we may identify places where there are those risks and use the tools available to governments to think of those things, find options, right? Because is there a possibility of approaching someone and saying, we would like to purchase a 16-foot wide portion of your property for an emergency evacuation route that would only be used in the case of a wildfire? I mean, if that's something you think we could add as an implementation guideline, Sarah, that's something I want to see.
we could put that, we could take that back to fire and real estate and some other folks and see if they can come up with a good way to resolve it, my experience in being part of conversations about secondary access as a planner, both when I worked for the Forest Service and now, is that it's very, having those conversations on the front end, feels like a life safety thing, but there's very often property owners are not willing to participate in that because they don't like access easements in some areas across their properties. It really does get to the point where often to provide that, you have to go across some places that are less developed, and then people are worried about the environmental impacts of the secondary access. And so it's very complicated. And I think, as Tim said, it's not like we could just draw a line on the map and figure it out. It actually is way, way complicated to do. And so that doesn't mean it's not worthwhile, but let me take it back to like Daniel, Kelly, and a few other people. Maybe Tim and Melissa can think on what it looks like, but like the city does require for new subdivisions, you can't develop without secondary
Yeah, I'm not
access.
putting subdivision.
Existing, how do we retrofit existing subdivisions to have secondary access when they weren't designed with it initially?
Emergency secondary.
Emergency.
Time, just. They never.
How does this work, Melissa? I'm thinking about like Timberline and Fernwood, where you have a network of private and privately maintained roads that the county is not responsible for maintaining, building, maintaining. So to have a policy like this, and we say that ensuring adequate access to properties, how does that apply for county in an area like that?
Yeah, that is definitely a challenge, particularly where their roads are essentially easements on private property. Sometimes there might be gates, that kind of thing. So, I know do have a fire expert here, and I know that there have been times where they've had to just crash through gates, that kind of thing. But I'm glad you brought that up, because with the Donny Park area plan that we just did, there was an on the ground effort to just, it was more of a pedestrian study to identify certain evacuation routes that actually went into the plan that could then be developed at a future, to create an evacuation plan for Donny Park. So that's one way to start to do something like this, is to look at where those logical places would be. Sometimes they're on private property, and then, mark them up on a map so that there could be an effort later on to develop a more detailed plan. But yeah, that's something that, for the fire departments, if there's an emergency, they're just gonna go down the roads.
Yeah,
Yeah, this is something that would be a challenge to ensure adequate access. We can't do that on a private road.
right. And so where I'm hung up is the word properties, because that sounds individual. And then well-maintained. In that particular.
Yeah, the maintenance of roads, particularly where they're private roads on private land, that's been an ongoing issue in the county for decades, and it's going to continue to be like that. Because property owners, they're responsible then for maintaining it. Goes on all we work with them as much as we can when we're approving new projects, but there's no requirement. There are options to form a road improvement district, to help themselves maintain their roads, but this is something we're always trying to provide in terms of education and information, but that's essentially creating a taxing district at that point. That's not a great answer.
Does an engineering though require surface, all-weather surface roads?
For some projects.
Even for access to a private property, if it's over a certain distance, it has to be all-weather surface and holding 46,000 pounds.
For some for a lot split or for certain CUPs, but it's only when we're looking at a new project It's, this is not just a county regional issue, this is a county issue, so, something that our comprehensive plan has recognized for decades. And we're continuing trying to promote the idea of road improvement districts and just, actually minimizing lot splits and curve subdivisions. There are different ways to try to up the design standards and minimize these types of situations, but yeah, it's going to continue, but we will not to get too far into.
The last 2 years, this has been a huge issue out in Fernwood and all of the flood mitigation that's happening out there, and you have all these private roads. And
Private roads that people don't want access over.
Christy Zeller is online and may want to weigh in on this discussion as well for IPS 3.
Cool. Christy, you want to go ahead?
Hi, sorry. What was the question? I'm sorry, I had somebody in my room.
Oh, that's okay. I was just saying that you had put in the chat that you might want to talk about evacuation in the Westridge, Northridge neighborhood.
No, I was just, you guys were asking what the name of the neighborhood is, and that's what it is up here. We do only have one access point. I mean, I guess technically Forest Road 515, but it would be very hard to get past that barrier without the key. But also, I feel like we moved up here understanding that that was the situation. So I don't know. I guess I don't really expect the city or the regional plan to fix a situation that we knew we were getting into when we moved here. So I don't know if that helps, but
It might help to address it for future.
yeah.
It's already addressed for future. It's already addressed for future developments. I mean, that's not.
Yeah. I mean, we know that if there's a fire up here, we're in big trouble. We know a fence we can drive a truck through and go across some private property and hope we make it out on the other side.
Alrighty, guys, I think that's the end of our discussion. Is there anything else anyone wants to raise on the, yes, before we to discussion?
Was 3.1 million parking lot? I'm sorry.
What did you?
Okay.
Secondary access thing, I think, was going in the follow-up list. But did you want to talk, do you think we should have made changes to IPS 3.1? Is that what you're thinking?
I do, because of the word properties.
You wanted to say instead of problem?
Just drop.
Other areas or communities, or drop it entirely. But it's about public rights of way and ensuring adequate access on public rights of way.
So just access
for
for emergency response.
So you'd want to say ensure adequate access on public rights of way for emergency response and well-maintained evacuation routes for safety. So that it stays to the publicly managed right of ways. People can always dedicate their private roads to the city or county with, they want to make the improvement. Got to just build them back up to the standards and then dedicate them. But when you've been blading your own road for 20 years,
Yeah, I mean, I don't, yeah, I mean, I don't think it's gonna make that much difference, so I'm fine taking it out, but I mean, like, it comes back to what the point that Christy made about, we moved here, we knew what we were getting into, and it's like people say that, and then the whole neighborhood's gonna burn down, and they're gonna be looking for someone to blame. Either way. It's tough to say, well, you didn't maintain your road, so that's why we let you die in your house, because, we couldn't get a fire truck there. But I don't, so
Melissa had.
So just a quick question then, or an idea rather, would you want to include an implementation guideline that talks about community evacuation planning at neighborhood levels, because that's something that could be promoted through this, you know, for these types of neighborhoods where we know that they have moved in, they understand where they want to be there. And we know that this is true throughout a lot of the county. It's a rural place. People want to be there. Also understand limitations like no water, that kind of thing. But maybe in this instance, you know, doing some community emergency planning on a community level might be something that would be beneficial. Just an idea.
California does that, so suggests that neighborhood is where it's gotta start, is private.
I'm not sure this fits, but I'm gonna try it anyway. One of the things, I've been on the fringes of a few of these efforts. And I was very, very impressed with how well the different agencies work together. That's your job. So, I think that that's really important. A little bit I've seen, the coordination between agencies was critical, and it was set up in advance, carried out, and I know there's some organizations that promote that sort of thing, and that you meet regularly to talk about it. I'm wondering if it ties into what you were just talking about with developing these escape routes and other connections. If these things could be brought together, should we put an implementation guideline in here that says to support this kind of effort?
I think absolutely. You know, one of the questions that I had just kind of been thinking of this and kind of along the lines of what Julie was saying, can't really dictate what a private property owner can do, but are there things that we as either the city or the county can do? Can the city council or the board offer a tax credit for letting us build an easement, things like that? What kind of outside the box incentives could we offer a private property owner to allow such things? You know, I don't know. And we've definitely, like I said, we've heard David talk about Lockett Ranches. We've been talking about their neighbors to the north in Mount Eldon Estates on the county side about this very thing for a couple of years, you know, and how we can help, you know, advocate. I definitely can't make someone, but how we can advocate that it's a great idea and coordinate that.
Thanks, Rick. Julia, so if we change access to properties to access along public rights of way, was that was your consent?
Yes, absolutely. Or dropping it all together. But I was hung up on the word, like the individual property. That's where I was hung up. So we just get rid of that or change that. I think that'd be good.
Cool. All righty. We don't have any public participation because there's no one here, right?
There's one person online.
We're not doing online.
Oh yeah, but we're not doing online. So there's just one person online. Nobody came in person today.
Okay, well, what I was gonna raise before, and I don't really know about it, but related to fire, so really the previous, just a couple of months ago, I heard about what I think is a very exciting new effort between Coconino National Forest and the county to treat 12,000 acres, the upper Rio de Flag, which could, instead of like fighting fire after it happens, the idea is to get out there and burn some areas and make them fireproof ahead of time, which could do a lot both for fire risk and for flooding for the Rio de Flag. So it seems like a very exciting thing. It's only been in the last 6 or 8 weeks that I've heard about it. As far as I can tell, it's just the county and the forest. The city's not playing a beneficiary if they do it. So I don't know that we would have any language in here saying this, you know, guideline for what the city should do. But I would hope that we do whatever we can. It's kind of a new thing instead of being behind the curve on fires. We're talking about being very proactive. So I guess I like the idea. I don't know if there's anything we can do with these guidelines to help the city.
City already does like do financing and assistance with firefighting and fire mitigation outside the city limits where it impacts our watersheds. Not sure where this 12,000 is or what it is, but.
So the forest restoration, the county's forest restoration, manager is working with the Forest Service. They've identified, and this is getting back to what Tom was talking about, the area, priority areas for forest treatment. And I think that's what you heard. Yeah, so that project is underway. And yeah, so the forest restoration director is part of the county flood control district. So they're working together to, do that mitigation, if you will.
The Forest Service has a nationwide effort right now to identify priority landscapes for treatment, like kind of coming off of what we did for Fort Fry of having the Forest Restoration Initiative in Northern Arizona identified a large swath of Northern Arizona for high fire risk. There is like a national effort right now to show where nationally we have those. There's also locally. So that's kind of an ongoing process all the time. And city and county firefighters participate in that always, but it just varies as to why the city may or may not be participating in a particular one, why the county might be the lead and we are just providing support. I
have a presentation on it. I can share.
Fill up the, all I know is the little stories on the paper.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Sarah, do you have any summary discussion and overview of the next meeting?
There's one thing I need to bring up. So this is a get your calendars out item, ladies and gentlemen. Others. One of the parking lot items was to have a follow-up conversation on food systems, and not food. Sorry, I have to say it real clear and loud. It's not an easy word this late, I guess. Food systems. And Natalie Pearson was proposing that it could be a lunchtime conversation on the 17th of June. Wanted to check that that's an available time for people who are interested in that. We of course would record it, make it available, but if you want to attend and be able to ask questions, just wanted to clear that on calendars before I send it out to everyone.
It's lunchtime.
She booked.
Wait, I eat lunch at like 10:45. So.
She booked between like 11 and 1 is the time block she built for it. That those like any time between 11 and 1 will work. So it could be 11, it could be noon.
I'm sorry, I've lost the bubble here. What exactly are we talking about?
This is a parking lot item. When we talked about the social and economic systems chapter, there was a long discussion on food systems that wasn't fully resolved and needed more information. But the food systems plan for the city is not done yet. And so the person writing it wasn't available for that meeting, said she would do like an educational follow-up for the group.
Will that be Teams or Zoomed as well?
Yeah, it'll be a Teams. So it can be done remote, listen to it like a podcast. We can send you the video after, but is that an okay time to schedule it?
Fine by me.
For 11?
Would.
Okay.
Don't think anybody else cares, but.
If nobody else cares, I'll tell her book it for 11.
Anything else?
Next meeting is the transportation topic. We are working to finalize a few things and I hope to have it out tomorrow, but it might be Thursday morning when you get it. That's another really key chapter. The other thing that'll be on next meeting's agenda is I said I would give you guys a memo with some example plans to look at. So, and I mean look at, not read. Because I just want to show you, we're starting and meeting tomorrow with the writer editor from Avenue Consulting, who's going to be our assistants on taking all these very bland Word documents and making them something visually appealing that tells the story in ways that I'm just not creative enough to do in my life. But they're getting started. And so we're putting a little memo together just so you have some links to some ones that have been recent award winners. What do they look like? How are they organized? Because this organization that we've been sharing is just a way to get through the content and material. When the writer editor gets their hands on it and sees what we're trying to accomplish, they may have really good ideas about how that gets organized or what's in a bubble or what kind of is in place. So that's what they're gonna help us populate. So in an effort just to get some initial feedback from you, we'll provide a little memo that supports that conversation.
I have a quick question about, can members of the public get idea of what the plan can look like before the meeting? Transportation, and if so, how do they do that? Like, it's kind of the rough draft that we get kind of thing.
So do members of the public, we always, whatever you guys get in your packet is also posted online. So if you go to the website before the meeting, there's an agenda link and a packet link. So everybody can see what you are looking at so that they can follow along with the discussion. So yeah, but it's changed. It's just like all the other ones. It's like half formatted maps and mostly getting the text and the content right and making sure we agree on what should be there. The writer editor who's been hired actually is gonna assemble that into the cohesive, good looking documents we're used to seeing at the end of these processes.
We're gonna call the meeting because that was it. There we go.
There we go.
All right.
No, seriously, is that it?
Yeah, that was it.
Okay, awesome. We did it, guys.
10 seconds or
Thank you.
10 seconds late.